So for a long time, I asked for permission to exist, not just in crypto, I mean in life overall. And what I learned slowly is that permission always has a cost. If you're new here, I use XRP as a lens to understand how money is moving in real time and what kind of infrastructure is quietly replacing the old system from my vantage point. And in this episode, I want to talk about something that looks small on surface but touches one of the oldest questions in finance, which is who gets to participate? So, when I first read about authorized trust lines on the XRP Ledger, a feature that allows issuers and recipients to decide who they establish a trust relationship with before any assets actually move between them. When I heard about all this, I didn't just think, oh, this is efficient. I actually felt the weight of the question underneath it. Who decides who gets access? Because the fear many people have about digital systems, especially as it relates to finance and identity, the feeling that participation could be limited, that the door could close, isn't something that's new. It's just becoming more visible today. Authorized trust lines don't remove that reality, but they do something important. They make the rules explicit. And once the rules are visible, the question then changes. It's no longer, how do I get in? It becomes, do I agree with the terms in order to get access? And that shift from permission to terms is showing up almost everywhere right now. And before you can understand, or we can understand, authorized trust lines, we have to understand what a trust line is in the first place. Because trust lines aren't new. They've been a part of the XRP ledger since the very beginning. Any issued token, a stablecoin, a tokenized asset, a security, cannot be held in your wallet unless you create a trust line to the issuer first. It's you telling the ledger, I'm willing to hold the tokens from this entity. That's it. When I open my cold storage wallet, for instance, and search for a token, and then click add, I'm actually creating a trust line. And I don't think many of us actually realize what we were doing in this process. It felt like almost adding a ticker, but it's actually establishing a recorded relationship. And by default, that relationship is open. Anyone can create a trust line to any issuer. The issuer has no say in who chooses to hold their token. And as retail, I never thought about this at all, to be honest. If someone sends me something I don't recognize, I simply ignore it, pay no attention to it. But for an institution, you can't ignore unexpected balances. You can't have random wallets holding your issued asset without knowing who they are. Because now it's on your balance sheet. Now it's legal exposure. Now it's accounting. That's the tension trust lines quietly create. By default, trust lines are open. Authorized trust lines change that. An issuer can enable a setting called require authorization now when you request a trust line. The issuer must approve it before any tokens can move. Holder request, issuer approves. Both sides must agree. And that changes the architecture from open by default to gated by design. Authorization is permanent once granted. However, activity on that trust line can still be frozen if necessary. And critically, an issuer must decide this before issuing anything at all. You choose what kind of issuer you are at the very beginning. You don't get to retrofit control later or make up rules or change them later. For years, trust lines, again, were open by default. Anyone could decide to hold the issued token. The issuer didn't get a vote in this say. But once banks and regulated institutions started exploring tokenized assets on XRPL, that openness became complicated because a bank can't issue something into the wild. They're required to know who they're dealing with. They're required to screen against certain lists. They're required to account for where their assets are being held. The original trust line model didn't give them a way to enforce that at the protocol level. So, authorized trust lines wasn't just created to make the ledger more restrictive. It was created to make it usable for institutions that already operate inside these rules. And that's the key tension. The ledger doesn't decide who qualifies. The issuer does. And the issuer brings whatever legal world they live in with them. Which means, very simply, if you can't meet the identity standards of that institution, you don't get through the door. That's not ideology, it's architecture. And architecture doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects the world being built on top of it. And right now, the world building on top of these systems is very unsettled. Right now, if you turn on the news, it feels different, to be gracious. Trade agreements are being renegotiated. Alliances are being tested. Countries are speaking directly about sovereignty. And I think more than they have in decades, and definitely probably for the first time in my lifetime. You scroll through social media and you see young kids joking about get ready with me for WW3. It's funny, it's wild, but it reflects something. The global climate feels unsettled, and who will lead the world feels like a question more than a statement. And when systems feel unsettled and disorganized, the question shifts from how do we participate to on what terms are we going to participate? You can see this shift in different regions of the world right now. In parts of Africa, leaders are openly discussing health without aid, moving away from dependency models towards domestic capacity. Zimbabwe walked away from a major US health agreement over data sharing clauses. They read the terms and they declined. That's not isolation, it's evaluation. In Europe, the conversation has turned towards digital sovereignty, reducing reliance on American technology infrastructure. In India, the phrase strategic autonomy shows up repeatedly in trade and diplomatic discussions. In Canada, there's growing public debate about economic dependence on the US. These aren't coordinated moves, but they share something very subtle: a willingness to pause before agreeing. Authorized trust lines live quietly inside that same posture. Because on XRPL, participation in an issued asset isn't automatic. It depends on terms. And those terms are set by whoever is issuing. The ledger doesn't decide. The world building on top of it decides. And right now, the world seems to be renegotiating who gets to write those rules. Authorized Trust Lines does not answer who gets to participate. It shows where the decision sits. And right now, across continents, that decision feels less assumed and more examined. Participation is being negotiated. Terms are being read more carefully. XRP doesn't choose those negotiations. It doesn't define those standards. It offers infrastructure, neutral rails. But that raises something deeper. Who gets to determine what neutral means? Is neutrality fixed? Or can it shift as the world shifts? Because if neutrality simply reflects whoever built first, then it's not truly neutral. It's just early. And early advantage isn't the same thing as fairness. But if neutral infrastructure can hold competing standards, if it can allow multiple systems to plug in without imposing one worldview, then maybe neutrality isn't about removing power. Maybe it's about creating space for balance over time. And in a world renegotiating sovereignty, that might matter more than we realize. Authorized trust lines isn't just a feature. It's a mechanism that shows us where participation is decided. It reminds us that even on an open ledger, access is defined somewhere. And right now, globally, those definitions are being examined more openly than they have in decades. Countries are reconsidering terms. Institutions are recalibrating alliances. Participation is no longer automatic. It's negotiated. The XRP Ledger doesn't impose a political identity. It doesn't set qualification standards. But the issuers building on top of it bring their own frameworks with them. So maybe the more honest question isn't just, is XRP neutral? It's, who gets to define neutrality? And can that definition evolve as more actors enter the system? Because authorized trust lines doesn't close doors. It shows us where the doors are. And in a world renegotiating sovereignty, visibility may matter more than certainty. If this helped you see the future feature differently, you can let me know below in the comments. And if you want to support the work that I'm doing here, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in my description, and also a Zaman tip option. And in the next episode, we'll stay with structure because the rails are being built either way. And I'd rather understand in real time what's happening versus reading about it in a book after it's done. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode. My name is James Harris. This is Layer One. And I hope that you'll come back and hang out with me some more. And I hope you have a great weekend. See you next time.